Okay, well, my clock says 3:15 Eastern. So I'm going to go ahead and welcome everyone on behalf of the National Transition Technical Assistance Center, the Collaborative. We welcome you to the CBVI and to this particular session on understanding financial responsibilities and service delivery, supplementing, not supplanting. Woohoo! Hope everybody is in the right spot. Anna, next slide, please. Anna, were you going to? Okay, thank you. So I am Brenda Simmons. You may want to go back one. Is there one more? Maybe? No? Okay. I'm Brenda Simmons, and I'm going to be one of the presenters today. And I am a Senior Technical Assistance and Research Analyst with George Washington University, and I also work for the INTACT. And I am going to turn it over to Brandy and Shayna, who are going to be your main presenters today, and let them introduce themselves as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brandy Boyer Rutherford, and I'm the Program Administrator for Transition Services with Florida's Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. And Shayna?
Good afternoon. My name is Shayna, and I'm a Unit Supervisor with Vocational Rehabilitation in Orlando, Florida.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's get started. So we have three primary objectives for this particular session, and those are really understanding the difference between supplementing and supplanting, identifying the criteria to determine vocational rehabilitation and local education agency, or LEA, you might hear us refer to that throughout the presentation, responsibilities for delivering pre-employment transition services, or PREETs. And we're also going to have a great opportunity for Brandy and Shayna to talk about Florida's process for developing that local education agency agreement and how they have strategized to develop some initiatives for implementation. So we hope that you all walk away with a good understanding of that when you leave within the next 45 minutes. Next slide. So just a little bit of the backstory. The intent of pre-employment transition services in the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act is really threefold. And it's important to really keep these things in mind. So PREETs really wanted to look at improving the transition of students with disabilities from school to post-secondary education or employment. And it was really about increasing opportunities for students with disabilities to practice and improve workplace readiness skills through work-based learning, and increasing opportunities for students to explore post-secondary training options that are going to lead to much more industry-recognized credentials and meaningful post-secondary employment as well. So as you keep these three things in mind, and as you listen to Brandy and Shayna talk about how they actually strengthened collaboration with their partners and identified a process, not only at the state level, but also at the local level to actually operationalize the intent of the regs surrounding PREETs. I think you're gonna see these things play out as they talk a little bit about that. They're also really good to think about as each of you move through and move forward, looking at your current pre-employment transition services, how you're developing new and innovative pre-employment transition services and programs. You may want to ask yourself, so will this new service or will this new program actually improve post-secondary outcomes for students with disabilities? Will it increase those opportunities? So let's think about that as we're kind of moving forward with our conversation today. Next slide. So in order to effectively enhance opportunities for students with disabilities, I wanted to point out just a couple of the regulations that are relevant to this particular discussion regarding financial responsibilities in service delivery. So first, the Rehab Act and its regulations require VR agencies to enter into formal interagency agreements with state education agencies that describe how those entities are going to collaboratively plan and coordinate transition services for students with disabilities that need those services. This formal interagency agreement really lays the foundation and provides that basis for determining which agency is going to pay for certain services, right? Section 113 of the Rehabilitation Act requires VR to provide or arrange for the provision of pre-employment transition services in collaboration with your local education agencies. And if you heard the opening keynote, Carol Doback talked a lot about that. It's important. It's almost like a must. You can't do pre-employment transition services without that collaboration piece. So Brandy and Shane are really going to talk about that as well. And decisions as to who's going to be responsible for providing those services that are really both special education and vocational rehabilitation, that's going to have to be made really, you guys, at that state or the local level as part of that collaboration, part of that conversation, part of those strategies that you identify through this formal interagency agreement. So that formal interagency agreement really is a big deal. VR agencies have the flexibility to include local education agencies as parties to the formal state interagency agreement, or to actually execute formal interagency agreements with local education agencies, which is what Florida has done, that are consistent with that state level agreement and really address the provisions that were laid out in that agreement. Florida is also one of the only just a handful, I think, of states in the nation that developed a joint state interagency agreement between the general VR agency and the blind VR agency in that state. So if you're in a state with two VR agencies, sometimes they develop separate state agreements, but they can also develop a joint one. And that's actually what Florida did. Florida also developed a local education agency agreement that I mentioned earlier, and that really provides the guidance for moving forward in implementing all of this stuff at the local level. So I'm really excited for you all to hear what they're going to talk about today. Next slide. The last regulation that I wanted to highlight to kind of finish laying the groundwork for what Brandy and Shane are going to be talking about is the section in the WIOA regulations that talk about coordination with education officials. So lots of states have asked for clarification and posed questions about those financial responsibilities of schools and VR when services fall under the purview of both entities, education and VR. So for example, pre-employment transition services and transition services can be both VR services under the VR program and special ed or related services under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. So while neither the Act as amended by WIOA or IDEA are explicit as to which entity is financially responsible for providing pre-ETS and transition, both of those acts state that neither VR nor the local education agency may shift the burden for providing services for which it would otherwise be responsible. That's a whole lot of words that says they're not going to tell you how to do it. You're really going to have to figure it out, right? At the local level, which is what they did. And you figure it out kind of through that interagency agreement. So this particular regulation really focuses on the importance of making sure that you talk about that coordination piece, that collaboration piece, that communication piece that you're going to hear Brandy talk a lot about. And this clause is kind of what we commonly refer to as the construction clause, which reminds us that nothing under Title I of the Rehab Act should be construed as reducing a local education agency's obligation to provide or pay for any transition services that are also considered special education or related services and that are necessary for ensuring a free, appropriate public education to children with disabilities in that particular state. So honestly, you guys, this right here is the closest reference you're going to find in the regulations to a term we often call supplanting. They don't use that word in the regulations. This is the closest thing you're going to find. And Brandy's going to talk about this a little bit more, but all of this really supports the fact that decisions as to which entity is going to be responsible for providing those services has to be made at the state and local level. So since the decisions about financial responsibility are really made at the state and local level, it really all does tie back to your formal interagency agreement. With that, I am going to turn it now over to Brandy and Shayna, and they are going to talk about how Florida developed this process and how you figured this all out. So Brandy, I'm turning it over to you. And next slide, please, Anna.
Well, I don't know about figured it all out, but I think that we're on the right path. So when you have an idea and you need to implement an idea, you have a couple of different steps that you have to go through. And to be successful in this, you need to develop relationships, and those relationships depend on communication. That's the only way this is going to work. So we recognize that we would need a stakeholder, buy-in, and then effective communication, securing those relationships, making sure that they are stable, and wanting to make sure that we are all working together to get our students where they want to be. The end goal for all transition services is to provide both school districts and VR and our students to help our students be as independent as possible and as successful as possible, to be the best versions of themselves. To do that, all of our stakeholders had to come to the table, and they have our students' futures in mind. But legislation, such as WIOA and IDEA, they are wonderful. They are fantastic, but they don't work if you don't embrace the process. So we're going to talk about how Florida does it. So next slide, please. So in Florida, we passed, there are two pieces of legislation that are in Florida statute related to transition services. The first states that, so the one on the left, that's 1003.5716, if you need to know that, is that pre-ETs will be provided to individuals with disabilities between the ages of 14 and 21 who have an IEP, or individualized education plan program, or a 504 plan. And that VR has to provide these services within 90 days of referral, or to get, if VR is not the appropriate agency, to make sure that this individual is connected with the appropriate agency. So that's how VR has been written into transition services law. On the other side of that, our state actually took the concept of transition and made it law that we begin planning for transition services at the age of 12. So as we all know, transition needs to be discussed as soon as the student enters school, pre-K. We want to be talking about what the outcome is going to be, but in Florida, by law, there are stated measurable gains, goals, there are assessments that have to be done before the student reaches the age of 14, so that at 14, services can begin. So we have state level buy-in, or we have state level statute. Next slide is, I'm going to talk to you about how we helped trickle that down. So in our state education agency agreement, we had the state level had the Bureau of Exceptional Education, the Florida Department of Education, Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, and Division of Blind Services, as well as our Developmental Disability Agency, which is APD. that created a need for us to communicate cleanly, clearly, actively. So we decided it would be a great idea to have an internal interagency. As the Division of VR and the Bureau of Exceptional Education and the Division of Blind Services and the Division of Career and Adult Education are all housed in the Department of Education, we have the whole range of services that we need to talk about. We need to make sure that we're all on the same page. So we started meeting weekly, actually. We brought all of us to the table so that we were all aware of what was going on, aware of how other programs were working. It was a quick way to address any kind of situations that arise. But also in this, we came together to create our LEA, so our Local Education Agency Agreement. We created a template that outlined certain activities that we wanted to make sure were touched on, things that were crucial that we felt to communication and interaction, and then also that mirrored that SEA agreement, that State Education Agency Agreement, so that everything was clean and clear and falling in line. So we'll go to the next slide. I'm going to tell you what was in that template. So in that, we define what the roles of each partner is. We discuss the process of mapping services, and then how outreach and collaboration would work. We also talked about technical assistance because school districts know how a student learns, and there's information that is gained from there that a VR individual, a VR counselor, or VR staff may not have access to. On the same token, we have valuable information about how a student is able to learn and interact and move in an employment setting, which can be very useful in a school setting. As with all things, we wanted to make sure there was a very clear process for grievance procedures and conflict resolution. And then also, because there is a very important part of WIOA, which we don't really get into here, but Section 511 is the most significant disabled individuals who may or may not go into a competitive employment. And we need to have that discussion because VR is the place where that starts. So if you have an individual who does not wish to go in, we need to have a procedure for that. So next slide. So when we define our roles, we need to know what supplant versus supplement is. In short, supplement is obviously to build upon or to add to. These are making sure that federal funds are expended under IDEA the way they're supposed to be, but also that VR funds are not replacing those services that should have been used and authorized by the IDEA funding. VR funds reserved for pre-employment transition services cannot replace, but they can enhance, expand, or create these services for students. And we need to make sure that we're doing just that. We don't want to take over those responsibilities of the school district. If it is something that the school district is supposed to be doing, then we cannot, VR cannot replace that. So supplant versus supplement, we definitely need to understand that so that we understand our roles. So next slide, please. So we know what the roles are. Now we're going to look at responsibility, because as with all things related to individuals with disability, individual is the first part. Everything is different. So we need to take a look at the services that an individual might need, and then identify if this service is related to an employment outcome or is it related to an educational outcome. So that's the purpose of the service. So they have same token, we look at that same service and we look to decide if this is something that is normally provided under an IEP, or is it normally something that's provided by VR? And then also looking at the idea, is this going to enhance the transition services that the school is already providing under IDEA? And then we look at eligibility. For VR, well, for any transition students under an IEP with IDEA funds, they can be considered comparable benefits to a certain extent for students in school, but they're not a service provided by VR. So we don't count it when we look at the services that we report provided to our RSA, which is our regulatory supervision agency. But also we have to take into consideration that those students who don't have an IEP, but they do have a 504, the services that we can provide them are much wider because there's there is no coverage of students with disability services under IDEA. So all of these things come into play when we're looking at who's going to provide the service for the student. Next slide. Thank you, Brenda. So with WIOA, with IDEA, with our Florida statutes, there are a lot of things that are written in those laws that have to be done. But the thing is, when you look at it, that we don't have to do this, we get to do this. We get to work together we get to work together how to map out the services for the individual, making sure that all the players are at the table, making sure that the service delivery is effective, making sure that they're coordinating with the end goal of the student, really identifying what the student needs and who can give that service. So next slide. So this is one of the tools that we can use for mapping services for individuals. As you can see, the 5 required preets are listed here, and it's listed by grade. And we can look at, this is just happens to be for grades 9 and 10, but it could be 7, 8, it could be 11, 12, because in Florida, we started looking at providing services at 14, which could be grade 8. We look at job exploration counseling. Is it part of a class? Is it part of something that VR needs to be doing? We look at work-based learning experiences. There are many things that schools provide customarily to all of their students. And if that's the case, then that needs to be a service provision by the school district. But that doesn't mean that VR cannot also provide a work-based learning experience, usually outside of the school day. So we use this tool to really figure out where we need to go, who's doing what, and it's become very useful in some interesting situations. Next slide, please. So an example of this is that self-advocacy is one of the services, and I should point out that VR does have the school districts as providers, and I'm going to hit on that in just a little bit. But the school, as self-advocacy is one of the services that a lot of our school districts provide as part of their IEP services, but also a service that VR provides as a formal training program. There are so many applications of self-advocacy. So we really want to look at the purpose of each program, each class. So when a student goes through self-advocacy with vocational rehabilitation, they're looking at how to request accommodations, how understanding their rights under oh goodness gracious, Americans with Disabilities Act. There it is, ADA. Understanding what is a reasonable accommodation. It's looking at setting goals, which could be an education related thing, but it's also developing leadership and being involved in the community. Now, self-advocacy in the education realm is looking at making sure that they're getting the right training that they need to accomplish to meet their goals when they leave. It's about self-determination. It's about independent living. It's about really recognizing the path that they're on in school and then understanding what those options are for them afterwards. Now, this is a good example of where VR and the school districts, they overlap. The purposes overlap, but there are some very clear differences. And as such, it's really easy to identify that this, if it's written on the IEP, then it's a school district provision. If it's not written on the IEP and it's not customarily given to every student, then it's something that VR can take into consideration. Next slide.
Thank you,
I'm
Brandy.
going to turn it over to Shayna. Yeah.
Yes. So what you are currently seeing on your screen is a vocational rehabilitation pre-employment transition services journey map. This map is a visual guide to help parents, students, school personnel have a better understanding of the process and something to turn to throughout the process. As we know, sometimes agency language can be overwhelming for individuals on the outside. So turning our process into a guide helps our agency's mission come to life in a map format. It has always been important to establish a strong connection with our county schools, and it took time and effort. The beginning was not always easy. Due to the constant staff changes from both VR and the schools, it has been a constant battle of back and forth with the schools, not to mention any legal aspects that come in with the territory. In the past, information is forgotten. IEP meetings are completed without VR representation. VR was not always welcomed with open arms in some of the schools, and not for a negative reason, just because the school was not well informed about what our agency is all about. Over the past 2 years, my amazing team of youth techs and counselors and I have been able to build a connection with Orange County Public Schools, especially our transition school program, all because of the journey map shown on the screen. Communication has increased, relationships formed, and a consistency of referrals are sent weekly. Communication is the first step in the process that has made the connection with the transition specialists, teachers, 504 coordinators at each of the schools. Oftentimes we gain rapport with one person at the school, build that connection just for the individual to leave and move on from that position, leaving us to have to rekindle the spark that once was there. This is why more recently, I have found that having a larger audience to listen to VR's missions, goals, what pre-ed services entail, in addition to what traditional service is all about, has allowed for growth in conversations with staff and parents. Parents have been overjoyed with the victories and successes that have been taking place with their child in such a short amount of time. I'm now going to walk us step by step of the map for clarity. Step 1, who do we serve? Pre-employment transition services are available to students ages 14 through 21 who have an IEP or 504 plan or other documented disability. They must be enrolled in secondary or post-secondary education programs. Step 2, requirements. In order to participate in pre-employment transition services, students do not need to be determined eligible. The only documentation that is needed to move forward is a copy of the student's IEP or 504 plan. If a student does not have an IEP or 504 plan, a letter from a school representative will suffice, stating the reasons why the student would benefit from the vocational rehabilitation services. Step 3, responsibilities. In order for this process to be successful, open communication is a must. At the beginning of the process, waiver forms must be filled out prior to any services being provided. Please ensure parents, students are responding to phone calls, emails, and letters being sent home. In Orange County, we recently had a transition fair that brought over 350 students at one time. Because of the collaboration with school staff ahead of time, we were able to organize folders for each individual student and color coordinate the folders based on the high schools attended. This way, the student had their pre-EDS referral, IEP 504 plan attached, and waiver forms needed for signature on the spot. They were able to meet with their prospective counselor, youth tech, and sign the forms at the event. All of these students were 18 and older. For our students that are under 18, the school either sends us referrals through the STAR portal, which is received by the supervisor for assignment, and/or the school emails or faxes referrals to our office. And these are assigned based on high school, which leads me into step number 4. Step 4, the process. A school representative will submit the referral via the STAR portal, as well as a copy of the IEP or 504 plan. Release forms will be provided to local school districts for these documents to be released. The supervisor obtains this information and assigns the referral based on the school assignment. The IEP 504 documents are scanned with the referral. Step 5, process continued. The student will be assigned to a VR staff member who will manage the case. The VR staff member's contact information will be provided to the student and parent at that first initial meeting. Introduction letter, appointment letters will be sent directly to the student's home. When received, please reach out to the VR staff member so that an appointment can be scheduled. These can be either virtual, via Microsoft Teams, or face-to-face. Step 6, process continued. The VR staff member will be reviewing all of the pre-ED services with parents and students, as well as provide a listing of all the providers VR works with in our local school districts that offer these services. Through informed choice, parents and students will choose which provider to work with for each service. Once the providers are chosen, the VR staff member will reach out to the providers to schedule the appointments and submit the referrals. Step 7, pre-employment transition services. These include job exploration counseling, post-secondary education counseling, workplace readiness training, work-based learning experience, and self-advocacy training. VR staff will provide the student with a copy of our pre-EDS flyer that describes each of these services in detail. Step 8, when do services occur? Typically, these services will take place after school hours, on weekends, or during school holidays, summer breaks. And step 9, when does pre-EDS end? As your student is closer to graduation and wishes to apply for our VR traditional program, they are able to apply. Pre-EDS services will end when the student turns 22. However, they can still receive services as an adult after they turn 22. If a situation changes resulting in the need for extra support while enrolled in school, the student may apply for VR traditional services at any time. Next slide, please.
Sorry about that. So you heard Shayna talk about the STAR portal. I'm going to tell you what that is. So when WIOA first came out and we got direction as to what that actually meant for the state to do, we created it's the STAR portal. Originally, it was also attached to a case management program, but I'm going to tell you about that in just a minute. So with the STAR portal, the school district logs in, enters information, and if you go to the next page, or next slide, I'm sorry. They assign the school that the student is in, so the school district and the school, and then they enter general information about the student, demographic information, contact information, and the services that they would think that they would like, as well as a quick confirmation that the student does have a disability and is receiving services through the school district. And then the referral gets electronically sent to the assigned VR office. It goes to the supervisor who gets to, who views it and can ascertain whether or not it is a duplicate case. And if it is a duplicate, it is returned. But if you, if it's not a duplicate, then a new case will be set up. The benefit to this is not just the fact that which is great, that an electronic referral can be sent, but also, if you look at the next slide, this gives feedback to the school district who is submitting them. Now they can, once a referral is submitted, they cannot access the information anymore, but they can see if a student had been referred previously, and they can see if the case is open, or if it was returned, or if if it's active, if it's closed, and they can give some reasons, some of them. So you can see on this one is closed, unable to locate, closed. In this particular case, the STAR case was closed and a traditional VR case was taken over. In 2020, we streamlined this process so that the students no longer had to close a potentially eligible case to apply for services. It's all in one smooth process now. Smooth is relative, but smooth process now. When a student is referred, if they choose to participate and we get consent from them and their family, they go into potentially eligible. And if at any time they decide they want to apply for VR services, they can move into applicant status, still receiving all of your pre-eds while they're waiting for their plan to be developed. They can continue to have pre-eds, and then once their plan is developed, those pre-eds have to be included as a service. But the STAR portal, oh, sorry. One of the things that was wonderful about the STAR portal is that when we did the streamline, we were able to allow the schools to upload the disability documentation along with the referral. So it sped up that process. It was a secure way to bring information in to our case management system. It goes straight to the supervisor, and the supervisor has some steps that Shana's going to talk about in just a moment. But the information table, for lack of a better word, lives on a secure server so that the school district can see every single referral they've ever put in. They can't access it, they can't go into it, they can't even get the documents that they uploaded, but they can see that a referral has been made and if they can continue on. So next slide. And Shana is going to talk to you about what happens on her side.
The VR approval process. So the school will submit the referral via the STAR portal. The school representatives, like I mentioned earlier, may also email or fax over the referrals. We utilize an encryption system so that all personal information is secure. The referral will then be assigned to the VR office, who's assigned to that school, and then this will be based off the zip code. The supervisor will then review the referral via the STAR portal, accept the referral, upload the attached IEP or 504 plan, and then assign the new case to the appropriate VR staff member. From there, the assigned VR staff member will review the disability documentation available. VR staff will contact that student to discuss pre-eds, pre-employment transition services, and available service providers. And ultimately, the student will then engage in their chosen pre-ed service. I'll now turn it back over to Brandy. Next slide, please.
So one of the beautiful things that Florida has done that I think is fantastic is we've brought on our providers, our school districts as providers once they meet the qualifications that any provider could be. This has evolved over time. They started out as the third-party cooperative agreement, then it became a contract. And then in 2020, we also went, in August of 2020, they went to fee for service. So the school districts perform just like any other provider does for, and we have a specific type of provider. It's a pre-eds provider. So they're able to provide work-based learning experiences. They're able to provide work readiness training, and they're able to provide self-advocacy training. We have best practices that all of these things take place outside of the school day, outside of the school year. And we encourage all of our staff to, when they're arranging for these services, to be cognizant of that. Make sure that if this is a student who's on an extended school year, we cannot be doing this during the school day. He cannot have self-advocacy during his summer school class. We need to make sure that current up-to-date information is given and communicated, because it is a little more complicated, but that LEA agreement truly does outline all of your key players and making sure that you're identifying the service that's necessary, as well as who should be providing that. And then, as with all things, communicate. You cannot do this without communicating. But this is the best way that we have found to serve students in rural districts. It gets our students involved from earlier on. It's a safe and comfortable provider that the families are okay with. And once they trust the school district, they can help us reach further with this student and get further in those goals. So it's all about communicating, but it is a little more complicated. And those school districts who choose to do this there's a little bit more stringent budgeting lines to make sure that the people who are providing the services are not doing it during the school day there, and they are not doing it as in a classroom, and they are not, overstepping what should be done under IDEA. So next slide, please. If you would like to reach us, we are here. This is our contact information. I'll tell you that VR Transition Youth at vr.fldoe.org. That will get, my whole office has access to that one, so you can get a real quick response. Of course, emailing or calling either Shayna and I will get you a quick response as well. But I will tell you that I am planning to be, and I think Shayna is too, planning to be in the next, what was it called? The optional, lab. Yes, that. So if you have any questions or you want to talk about any of these things anymore, then please come and we'll talk to you.
Thank you so much, Brandy and Shayna. That was great information. I tried to answer some of the questions that came in as you all were talking. Take a look at that, make sure I didn't say anything wrong. We might need to clarify it in the lounge if I said anything wrong in that, but we really appreciate it. And we hope you all have a great rest of your CBVI, and come see us in the lounge. And Christine, the session that they need to go to if they want to ask more questions of Brandy and Shayna about that STAR portal and how they communicate with the schools around that, what was the name of that session again in the lounge?
That is the Vocational Rehabilitation and Education and Pre-Employment Transition Services.
And
okay,
someone
that
said
sounds great.
They couldn't get to the lounge, so I want to answer a real quick question. The STAR portal is owned and maintained by VR. So we pay for it. That's our thing.
Thank you. Perfect.
Yep.
Thank you so much.